Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Welcome. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Tensions between Air Canada and its union continue to escalate as we get closer to a strike by the airline's pilots. Calgary Conservative MP Michelle Rempel-Garner says her party has a plan to protect Canadians from online threats. And a forum is taking place tonight in Lethbridge, where UCP members will get a chance to meet the three candidates who are vying to become the nominee for Lethbridge West.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Tensions between Canada's largest airline and pilots are mounting as a potential strike or lockout at Air Canada is only days away. A number of business groups are meeting in Ottawa right now to urge the government to intervene after calling for binding arbitration in an open letter. Air Canada says it's increasingly likely that work will grind to a halt as talks will remain far apart with the union. The union says corporate greed is holding up the talks as Air Canada continues to post record profits while expecting pilots to accept below-market compensation. Calgary Conservative MP Michelle Rempel-Garner says she's tired of the Trudeau Liberals not doing enough to protect Canadians from being threatened or abused online. She says the Liberals' Bill C-63 doesn't do enough and instead just ends up censoring Canadians. She says the Conservatives have a much better plan.
New Conservative legislation will introduce protections in three areas of focus. Unlike previous Liberal bills, it will obtain these protections for Canadians without creating a government-managed surveillance state or putting a chill on charter-protected speech. The new legislation will first seek to modernize the existing crime of criminal harassment to address the ease and particularly the anonymity of how it happens online. To be clear, this update won't criminalize something like two people disagreeing about policy online or other types of expression of opinion that is protected under the Charter. Specifically, the provision in our new Conservative legislation will be based on the existing definition of criminal harassment, applying specifically to those who repeatedly send unwanted, harassing content that causes somebody to reasonably fear for their safety or well-being.
The federal NDP caucus retreat just wrapped up in Montreal. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh was asked if we could see an election sooner rather than later, as opposed to October 2025, since he ripped up the supply and confidence agreement with the Trudeau government. He says, anything can happen.
All bets are off. We've torn up the agreement with the Liberals. That means they can expect no help and no support from us. Anything that happens in Parliament will be based on is it in the best interest of Canadians. We'll be fighting to find ways to get more relief for Canadians, to get more help to Canadians. That's what we're going to be focused on. And we will use every tool we can to try to get more relief for Canadians.
A spotlight has been cast on foreign countries like China and their reported attempts to interfere with our elections. Fred Bradley served from 1995 to 2013 as a parliamentary development advisor in Ukraine and other countries to ensure election integrity. He says there are steps Canada could take to protect our elections.
I think the idea of having a foreign registry, I think other countries have it, Great Britain, the United States, Australia, to ensure that these activities, these agents have to register. And maybe our security services need to be perhaps given more resources to protect our electoral systems against this.
Make sure you catch more of this informative interview with Fred Bradley, former Parliamentary Development Advisor, and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up later in our broadcast. Premier Daniel Smith has spoken out against the federal government's plan to relocate tens of thousands of asylum seekers here to Alberta. She says Ottawa is moving ahead even without any financial assistance to support our province. She says last year alone, Alberta welcomed over 200,000 people to our province. She says although Alberta represents only 11.8% of the Canadian population, we are currently supporting 22%, or over 70,000 Ukrainian evacuees who arrived in Canada. Now, in a statement, Premier Smith had this to say: Section 95 of the Constitution is clear. Immigration is an area of shared authority between the federal government and provinces. Yet the Trudeau government's unrestrained open border policies, permitting well over 1 million newcomers each year into Canada, is causing significant challenges, and it's simply not sustainable. The three candidates trying to become the nominee for the UCP for the Lethbridge West riding will be answering questions by party members in Lethbridge tonight. Now, to chat about this in more detail is Davy Wiegers. He's the president of the UCP's Lethbridge West riding, and he joins us from here in the Windy City. Davy, the three candidates are Lethbridge City Councillor and former Lethbridge Police Chief John Middleton Hope, Aaron Leclerc, who was the constituency office manager for both MLA Nathan Newdorf and MP Rachel Thomas, and Lethbridge real estate agent Shauna Grunninger. Now, each candidate brings something special or different to the table. Where and when does all of the action begin tonight?
The doors open at the Lethbridge Public Library Theatre Gallery at 6 p.m. And in the gallery then we'll start the forum at 7, and that will go through to 9. The 6 to 7 when the doors open, that allows the contestants to mingle with the members and add any one-on-one conversation they may want to have prior to the event itself.
So when is the nomination vote when we will officially find out who will become the nominee for the UCP for the Lethbridge West riding?
It's coming up really quickly, just a little over a week away on the 23rd. And the vote itself will again be held in the Theatre Gallery at the Lethbridge Public Library.
Davy, this is a riding that was held by the NDP Shannon Phillips for quite a number of years. What will it take to make it Tory blue?
We have volunteers coming from each one of those constituency associations to come knock on the doors, get out the vote, and ensure that the positive message of the UCP, the forward thinking and forward action that has been put through by our government translates into Lethbridge West. So Lethbridge can present a united front to government and, really bring the interests of Lethbridge and Lethbridge West particularly to the forefront.
Premier Daniel Smith has until January the 1st, I believe, to call a by-election, and your nominee will be chosen by the 23rd. Any chance the Smith may call the by-election a little earlier, before Thanksgiving, maybe?
If I were a betting man, I'd probably say that it would be maybe prior to American Thanksgiving, but I don't think we're going to see prior to Canadian Thanksgiving, I don't think.
Davy Wiegers is the UCP Lethbridge West riding president. Thanks so much for your time today. As for the NDP nominee for Lethbridge West, it is former Lethbridge City Councillor Rob Miyashiro. Well, it was a soggy day here in Lethbridge for a Thursday and fairly cool. Jeanette Rocher is now with an early peek at the forecast. Jeanette, how long will the showers be sticking around?
Well, we can expect another 10 to 15 millimeters of rainfall tonight on top of the 15 to 25 millimeters that we were forecast to receive today. So soggy Thursday is an understatement there. But the good news is things are going to clear up. So as we get into Friday, tomorrow, we are looking at that rain to start easing up by noon. And then after that, the clouds should start to part and we should start to see that sunshine again, just right in time for our weekend. And of course, I'll be back later in the show to give you all those weekend details.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. Israeli military officials say they continue to strike major blows against Hamas, including taking out 4 key Hamas military commanders in the Gaza Strip. According to TBN Israel correspondent Yair Pinto, the fight with the Israel Defense Forces also continues with the other terrorist group, Hezbollah.
The Air Force pounded Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon, destroying rocket launchers and other military infrastructure. Security operations also continue in Judea and Samaria, including the targeted assassination of a terror cell in the city of Tubas. In Gaza, Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar breaks his silence and reveals details about his own plans, while the IDF publishes documentation of the tunnel where 6 Israeli hostages were held and later executed.
Russia has reportedly begun a counteroffensive against Ukrainian troops to take back their land in the Kursk region. According to Russian military officials, Russian troops have reclaimed about 10 settlements in the area after Ukrainian forces stormed into Kursk over a month ago. A commander of Chechen forces claimed 6 Ukrainian brigades suffered heavy losses. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed the counteroffensive, claiming it was going in line with our Ukrainian plan. Ukraine still controls around 1,300 square kilometers of Russian territory and is still expected that Ukraine will use these claims as leverage in talks with Russia towards a land swap agreement. President Zelensky is expected to meet with U.S. President Joe Biden with a victory plan sometime this month. During this week's presidential debate, former U.S. President Donald Trump amplified rumors that Haitian immigrants in Ohio were abducting and eating pets, such as cats. Republican Party officials in Arizona are kind of playing off the rumors with new creative billboards in the Phoenix area.
Donald Trump mention that Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio are eating people's cats and pets, which is a false statement that has been gaining traction, particularly in Republican and more conservative social media circles online. So the Eat Less Kittens ad connects to what we've seen from former President Donald Trump before, using anti-immigrant rhetoric, connecting immigrants who are coming into the country to sort of frankly bizarre behavior, suggesting that un-American behavior, that these immigrants are eating cats. The immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, the city says, first of all, that this behavior is there's no evidence of this behavior. There have been no credible or specific reports of this behavior.
The father of an Ohio boy killed last year when a Haitian immigrant hit the school bus he was riding in is imploring Donald Trump and others to stop using his son as a talking point in a debate about immigration.
I wish that my son, Aiden Clark, was killed by a 60-year-old white man. I bet you never thought anyone would ever say something so blunt. But if that guy killed my 11-year-old son, the incessant group of hate-spewing people would leave us alone. The last thing that we need is to have the worst day of our lives violently and constantly shoved in our faces. Politicians, Bernie Moreno, Chip Roy, J.D. Vance, and Donald Trump, they have spoken my son's name and used his death for political gain. This needs to stop now.
Lethbridge police have arrested a man in connection with a random assault of a 27-year-old woman back on September the 10th. Police responded to that day after a man broke into the woman's home along the 200 block of Mayor McGrath Drive North and attacked the victim with a weapon before fleeing out through the window. The woman was taken to Chinook Regional Hospital with serious injuries. The suspect was identified by members of the Violent Crimes Unit and was arrested on the 11th. He remains in custody and the investigation continues. Alberta RCMP say that 3 people are dead at a home in Lloydminster on the Saskatchewan side of the city. Police are investigating the incident as a triple homicide and a targeted attack. The bodies were discovered following a wellness check by police. The suspect is still at large. Police issued a brief statement assuring residents that there's no current threat to the public. Now, according to locals, RCMP gathered at the home on Wednesday evening, taped it off, and have been there ever since. No word yet on the identities of those who died. Autopsies will be conducted over the next couple of days. Crow's Nest Pass Council has announced that residents will participate in a non-binding vote to determine whether or not a significant coal mining project should move ahead at Grassy Mountain near the municipality. Council passed the motion on September the 10th and will have to confirm the dates while holding the vote within 90 days. Deputy Mayor Dean Ward, who put the motion forward, spoke with Bridge City News on what effects this project could have on their region.
We're talking about very good paying jobs here. The mines over in BC are paying 6-figure wages to their employees. That will create hundreds of jobs at those high wages. It'll create numerous spin-off jobs. There's various contractors that supply the mines. Growth will be obvious, right? The mine's going to employ hundreds of jobs and there'll be hundreds of spin-off jobs from the mine. We all know this has been a very contentious, controversial issue. There's many groups that have spoke about this. You can't pick up a newspaper or go online today and not read somebody's opinion about this mine. And we feel it's really relevant to ask our residents what they feel about this mine. Before you say no to everything, let's take a proper look at it and see if there is a safe way to do it. Because a plane crashes, we don't shut down all the airlines and stop flying. You figure out what caused the problems, you fix it, you mitigate it, and you move on. And this province has been founded on the development of its natural resources, and we want to share that in our corner of the province too.
The Crow's Nest Pass has a long history of coal mining going back 100 years. A historic underground mine in Bellevue from the mid-20th century still brings in many visitors each and every year. The Interfaith Food Bank here in Lethbridge is in dire need of food, including meat and fresh vegetables. The group's executive director, Daniel McIntyre, explains why they have such a shortage right now.
Normally at this time of year, this cooler behind me would be overflowing with produce coming in from our local farms and local gardeners. But this year we just haven't seen it coming in the quantities that we need to be able to keep up with the demand. At the beginning of the season, we were worried about things like drought and water restrictions. So we do know that a lot of our local gardens didn't grow as much as what they were planning to grow in a normal season. Some people decided to not grow a garden this year at all. But we are also seeing that the demand for food is high. We normally get a lot of the distressed produce that is not retail perfect, but because people are having trouble buying their groceries, a lot of our retailers are discounting that produce and selling it, even if it's not in perfect condition. And those are the items that have the most nutrient value, the proteins and the vitamins that people need. So if you're already struggling and not getting the vitamins that you need, you end up with health problems. You have other barriers that are keeping you out of the workforce. We're really grateful that we're very close to the season of giving, and we'll see a lot of community collections happening at churches, schools, even local businesses.
The Interfaith Food Bank has been serving the Lethbridge area for the past 35 years. The annual Free Coulis Fest is coming up to Lethbridge Polytechnic this weekend. Stephanie Savage, manager of alumni and engagement with Lethbridge Polytechnic, says the institution is opening its doors not just for students, but for everyone to enjoy. The event will take place from noon till 5 on Saturday. Savage explains what the event is really all about and what fun we can expect.
Is all about bringing our community together for a celebration on campus. So it's a little bit like a county fair where you're going to find food and fun and games and activities. And it's just a little bit of everything to make sure that our community is really a part of what we do. So this event offers a ton of stuff for the community. 18 different food trucks, a big truck zone where people can see city-owned vehicles like fire trucks and garbage trucks and buses. And this gives them an opportunity to actually go and look at them so that they understand what those vehicles are when they're driving through. There's also egg equipment, and there's a little mini show and shine that's run by. Excited to have monster truck rides at the event this year. It's important that we do this annually because this event celebrates kind of the best parts of our community.
Yeah, it's always a great time. Savage says the Polytechnic, which used to be known as Lethbridge College, launched Coulis Fest back in 2017 to say thanks to everyone who helped make their first 60 years so very successful. Well, we enjoyed some clouds and light showers again today in Lethbridge, and that trend should continue this week. A full look at the weather pictures coming up. Well, we saw quite a bit of moisture again today and slightly cooler here in Lethbridge. Jeanette Rocher is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, you know, the nice thing about this rain here in the city is that it kind of settles down all of the dust.
Well, that is true, Hal, and of course that includes the 15 to 25 millimeters of rain. Today we are expected to see another 10 to 15 fall overnight, but as we get into Friday, we're going to see the rain end around noon. Also some overnight fog that developed could be dissipating by noon as well. After that, the clouds should part. We should start to see some sunshine for our weekend there. A high of 19 degrees on Friday, up to 20 on Saturday with clear skies. Same thing for Sunday there, clear skies and 20 degrees down to 19 again on Monday. 17 on Tuesday. So both Tuesday and Wednesday, we could see that rainfall return again, and then a high of 16 degrees. For our next Wednesday, which kind of brings us a little bit lower than the seasonal average for this time of year. Seasonal high is 20 degrees, seasonal low 6 degrees, 32. That was our record high happening on this day back in 1969. And our record low for this day was -6, and that happened back in 1949. 7:04, that's when the sun rose this morning. A sun set this evening at 7:49, giving us 12 hours, 45 minutes of daylight, if you can believe it. 6 minutes shorter than we saw yesterday. That means fall is definitely coming. It's right around the corner. 16 for a high in Victoria. Showers easing up in the morning, beginning in the afternoon, though, in Vancouver. 17 for the high there. A high of 18 degrees in Edmonton. We could see mainly sunny skies there, and in Calgary, clouds in the morning, then a mix of sun and cloud by the afternoon. High of 18 there as well. As we look to the rest of the prairies, we're seeing a risk of thunderstorms in Saskatoon, 30% chance of showers, 18 for the high there, up to 60 winds expected. Looking at the chance of showers as well in Regina with a risk of thunderstorms, 20 for the high, 26 in Winnipeg. Still summertime there, but they could see some showers. Now over in the central part of the country, we're seeing mainly sunny skies. at 28s all around for the expected high tomorrow in Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. As we get into Atlantic Canada, Fredericton looking at a high of 26 degrees, could see that risk of a thunder shower. Chance of rain there. Mix of sun and cloud in Halifax. Charlottetown, mainly sunny skies, 25 for the high and a high of 20 in St. John's tomorrow. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Stats Canada says the amount of household debt Canadians owe compared to their income dropped lower in the second quarter. Household credit market debt proportional to household income fell to 175.5% on a seasonally adjusted basis in the second quarter. That's down from the first quarter. Now, the household debt-to-service ratio increased to 14.97% on a seasonally adjusted basis. That is up from 14.89% at the end of the first quarter. Stats Canada says households had average debt, including mortgages, of $176,525 in the second quarter. Two major auto manufacturers are teaming up to create a strategic partnership. The agreement between General Motors and South Korea's Hyundai will look to explore joint development and production of gas-powered engines and vehicles. The Memorandum of Understanding will also delve into clean technologies such as electric and hydro powertrains. The two companies may also work together to procure parts and source raw materials such as steel and critical minerals used in batteries. The partnership marks the first time Hyundai has been linked with another automaker for large-scale initiatives. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 263 points on the day to finish at 23,475. The Dow was up 235 points to 41,096. The S&P 500 was up 41 on the day to 55.95, and the NASDAQ was up 174 points to 17,569. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up $1.85 to 69.16 U.S. per barrel. Natural gas was up a cent to 2.36 U.S. Gold was up 47.67 on the day to 25.59.10 U.S. an ounce, and silver was up $1.19 to 29.88 U.S. an ounce. Feed wheat is at $7.56 per bushel, barley's at $5.92, canola's at $12.74, and corn is at $7.34 per bushel. Live cattle October contract was down $1.30 to 183.15. Feeder cattle were up $1.50 to 242.05, and lean hogs October contract is up 90 cents to 87.33. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 73.60 U.S. Recapping one of our top stories, a number of business groups are urging the federal government to get involved in negotiations between Air Canada and its pilots. They're calling for binding arbitration. Air Canada says it's increasingly likely that work will grind to a halt as talks remain far apart with the union. The union says corporate greed is holding up the talks as Air Canada continues to post record profits while expecting pilots to accept below-market compensation. When it comes to election interference, what can Canadians really do about it? Fred Bradley is a former MLA and has some ideas he shared with BCN's Jeanette Rocher. Watch for that informative interview coming up shortly. When you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also, be sure to visit our website anytime to check out a number of stories and interviews.
The U.S. presidential election will be here very soon. And of course, here in Canada, we could see a federal election as well because we currently have a minority government. Increasingly, we are hearing concerns about election integrity and potential election fraud. So joining me today from the Crow's Nest Pass area of Alberta is Fred Bradley. And many of you may remember Fred as the former MLA for Pincher Creek from 1975 through 1993. And he also served from 1995 to 2013 as a parliamentary development advisor in Ukraine, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan, which included advising on election integrity. So Fred, great to have you with us today. Welcome to Bridge City News.
Well, thank you very much. Very pleased to join you.
Okay, so Fred, what was your experience like in some of the foreign countries that we mentioned there? And to what degree did they experience attempts to manipulate the elections?
Well, my actual experience was in Ukraine in terms of election monitoring, and I monitored elections in 1998 parliamentary elections, the 2004 presidential election, and the 2012 parliamentary election. And over the period of time, I saw in my initial experience in 1998, there was certainly a lot of manipulation and fraud at the polling stations. Um, but what I witnessed in 2004 during the presidential election was certainly very eye-opening because I monitored the three rounds of the presidential election in 2000 or in 2004, and saw many different types of election fraud during that and manipulation of the vote. When we got to the 2012 parliamentary election, it was basically what we would call a fundamentally free and fair election. The processes, the results of the voting were accurate and portrayed the will of the people. But I saw some interesting things in 1998 in terms at polling stations. Obviously, manipulation by administrative resources being used to back the party of power's candidates in elections, voting irregularities at election polling stations. But 2004 was really the ultimate um, experience in monitoring pervasive election fraud conducted by the administration of the political party and the administration presidential administration in Ukraine or their cohorts, and Russian interference was obviously a hallmark of that. I could go into some detail on that if you wanted me to, but there was things like carousel voting where buses would roll up and people would come out and go into polling stations and vote and then go on to another polling station because their names were on multiple lists in multiple different polling stations, and that's how one way of influencing the vote. The other was disappearing ink, where if they knew a polling station was going to vote for an opposition candidate, they would have this disappearing ink pen, and when the ballots went to count, the ballots would not show the mark for the opposition candidate. And then there was actually in the second round experience where the one constituency we were monitored in, that at the end of the day, the polling commission had got so expert in what they were doing was they just reversed the results. So they reported that their favored candidate, which was the Russian-supported candidate, had won the election. They reversed the votes for the Yushchenko, who ultimately won the presidential election, but they just reversed the votes and filed them accordingly and said this was the result of the vote for this election commission in favor of the Yanukovych versus Yushchenko. So it was really a real eye opener in terms of what can be done. But the use of administrative resources, the election commissions itself, the Central Election Commission, they had 1 million more people vote at the end of the day that than had registered to vote during the election. So they just created all sorts of election. That was absolutely election fraud at a very high scale, which resulted in a third round of voting, the firing of the then Central Election Commission, which had perpetrated the fraud, and then had a fair and free election. The third round was absolutely different. They followed the procedures as laid out by the law, and they didn't have the interference that had taken place in the first election. That's basically the experience that I had witnessed in terms of election fraud.
So corrupt. Now, here in Canada and the US, there's been a lot of attention on foreign interference attempts from nations like China and Russia and Iran, among others. So what methods are hostile nations using to try to sway election results over here?
Well, there's all sorts of
it's gotten
and
more
I'm not
sophisticated, obviously, than the disappearing ink, right?
The game has changed incredibly. Social media is a big part of it.
Right.
Manipulating social media, fake news and propaganda, deep fakes and manipulated media. I mean, hacking into political parties' campaigns. This has happened in the United States both currently in terms of Democratic and Republican attacks. They can target voting infrastructure. There's just, there's diplomatic and economic pressures that have been used. They can targeting influence operations, manipulation of traditional media sources with putting in wrong data out there, which is then reported, et cetera. So there's many different ways in which foreign actors can interfere in our elections. And then then they have their espionage and covert operations, and they will also exploit any loopholes they see in our electoral processes if they can do that. So there are many different ways in which that foreign interference and manipulation can take place, and both Russia and China have been big actors in that. In the United States, Russia more in the United States, China here in Canada, in terms of some of the recent things we've seen.
Do we know, Fred, if any of these efforts have actually changed the outcome of an election?
It's really that is really difficult to determine. I mean, in very close targeted ridings, it may have an influence. I mean, there's been those allegations in Canadian elections, particularly I think in one in Vancouver. They've manipulated political parties. Have they actually affected the results? That's extremely difficult to assess. In a very close election, I mean, how do you influence public opinion? If through social media and influencers, you influence public opinion, how do you measure that? How do you actually show that that's had an effect on the results? So that's one aspect. And recently, I think we've seen in the United States, where the Russians have just perfected their manipulation, where they actually are paying domestic social media influencers to put forward their propaganda pieces, which they promoted in RT and other sources. So they're actually paying Americans or Canadians to manipulate what is being the information they want to target to voters in terms of trying to influence an election or public opinion. I mean, if you push certain stories which aren't true or there's partially true and just continue to push that with people generally, after many periods of receiving information, they start to, even though they may know something is false, it becomes part of the psyche of what they believe or what they think is true.
Yeah, that's true. What changes do you think the federal government could put in place to make it a lot more difficult for other nations to interfere?
Well, we currently have a Royal Commission that's looking into that and was going to provide some advice on that. Obviously, whether it's direct foreign influence by embassies or staff of embassies, I think actions need to be taken. I think the idea of having a foreign registry, I think other countries have it, Great Britain, the United States, Australia, to ensure that these activities, these agents have to register. And maybe, and our security services need to be perhaps given more resources to protect our electoral systems against this. Social media, how do you control that? We have the arguments of free speech versus actually putting out misinformation and misfacts. That's very difficult to control. And cybersecurity, I think you have to look at also those aspects. So there's many different ways we can look at it, but it's extremely difficult to in this age and with artificial intelligence and the manipulation that can be done there. I mean, we've seen in the United States where there's fake videos out there now.
That is the scariest thing, like you were saying before, the
of a very prominent musician endorsing one candidate when she's actually came out and endorsed another candidate publicly last night. So
yeah. Oh, that is the scariest. Do you think that we need stricter voter verification rules, or, as some argue, would that discourage people from voting? Because, you know, you hear stories of like election poll stations where, like, Elections Canada surveyed election officers during the 2019 Canadian federal election, discovered that, what was it, 35% of polling staff sometimes or often encountered individuals asking to vote who were not on the list of electors and who were unable to be registered at the polling station. So should that maybe raise some red flags?
Well, you know, I think we have some very good election processes in Canada.
Okay.
The so what happens at polling stations, and maybe this, you know, we used to have an enumeration list where we hire enumerators to go door to door in the first part of when we had longer election periods. So we decided we had to shorten the election period. There used to be 2 months federal elections because it gave time for hiring enumerators to go door to door to register voters. Those lists would be published. Then people could go to the list and have an opportunity to revise and have their name put on the list. But we don't do that anymore. It's compiled electronically based on provincial records or federal records, and they have a list. That list, so we shortened the election campaign to basically a 1 month campaign. So if your name isn't on the list, you have an opportunity prior to the election to have your name added to the list. And you go, it's usually an electronic process. The day of the election, people will show up, and what we require for verification, even you'll get a polling card, I think, from the federal government. But what we require when you go to vote is to show a photo ID, a government issued piece of photo ID with your name and address on it, or 2 pieces of ID showing your name and address. And that's when people go to the poll, they expect they can go in and vote. They may not have their ID with them that verifies that. So, and their name may not be on the list. And that's where, that's where the issue comes in. You go to the polling station and you haven't brought your ID with you. And people will say, I'm not on the list, or I can't vote because I don't have my ID. Yeah. So that's pretty strict. I mean, that's pretty strict identification of a voter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Photo ID or 2 pieces of government issued or something, a utility bill that has your name and address that proves that you are a resident in the place in which you are voting. That I think is the cause. But I do think, you know, those requirements are very very stringent to some degree. That you have to have these 2 pieces of ID to prove who you are. So it's very. I don't think you have people voting who aren't eligible to vote. It's people who may be disqualified because they can't prove their residency. Does that change the results of an election? I think those. And the other thing, if you don't have that information, if you have a voter, a friend, or someone goes with you who lives you sign a sworn statement that I live in such and such a address, and you have a neighbor or a friend who comes and signs a sworn statement, yes, I know this person, I verify that they live at this address, they will put you on the list. So, I mean, that would be access to voting. Do all citizens have credible access to voting? And we have all sorts of procedures for absentee voting if you're out of the country, or if you are in a nursing home, or some incapacitated voting opportunities for people.
Right. Oh gosh, it looks like we're out of time here, but Fred, we appreciate you coming on today and sharing your knowledge with us, especially from the voting interference that you experienced in those other countries. So fascinating.
Well, it was certainly a fascinating experience for me, and a very interesting period of time in my life.
Absolutely. Fred Bradley is the former Alberta MLA and an overseas parliamentary development advisor.
What would our world look like if we ever saw truth in politics? And do we ever currently see truth in politics? And if we do, what happens to the politician? And how does the public respond? to that revelation of truth? Well, today's guest joins us from Ottawa. He is Dr. John Robson and a professor at Augustine College and a columnist with the National Post, Loonie Politics, and also the Epoch Times, where he recently wrote an article entitled "Refusing to Lie or to Acquiesce in One is Vital for a Thriving Society." Good to have you with us, Dr. Robson.
It's a pleasure to be here, he said truthfully.
Yes, awesome. Yeah, it goes without saying, if someone's talking to me and they start a sentence with being truthfully honest or in all honesty, it causes me to wonder what happened to the veracity of what came before. So I want to ask you, you quote John 8:32 in your article, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." If everyone pledged never to tell a lie or to acquiesce in a lie, you suggest it would have a significant impact on our society.
It would be, I think, transformative. And I want to say that it also would be transformative to the people who decide to do it. And then I want to be very clear, as I always try to be. I'm not suggesting here that what we need is for everybody to be like me. This is not about how great I am. It's about how great the truth is. And when you look at it, just to begin with in politics, what is the number one thing that people hate about politicians? The thing that comes up again and again in surveys and in conversations, that politicians don't tell the truth. They say what they think will advance them personally, what will advance their party. And they're cunning at it. They put enormous amounts of time and effort into spin control, the result of which, paradoxically, is that nobody believes anything that comes out of their mouths, with rare exceptions. So it's even self-defeating tactically. But at a much more profound level, it means that government goes badly wrong and we can't have a proper discussion about what's wrong, because you can't say that is the rule on almost anything that's true and important. For instance, that the Canadian healthcare system not only isn't working, but can't work as currently structured. That Canada has too much immigration. That Canadian governments spend too much and they try to do too much. Or even, and this was actually what triggered this whole thing. Okay. I got to thinking about this about a year ago because I was at a dinner that began with one of those usual sanctimonious land acknowledgements. Right. And I sat there thinking to myself, this is a double lie. It is a lie because many of the people in the audience do not believe that they are on stolen land, and because the people who actually do think so don't intend to give it back, which in many respects is worse. And I thought, okay, here I am, the outlier weirdo, don't make a fuss and annoy people. And then after the dinner was over, somebody that I knew but not very well came up to me and said, "We've got to do something about those land acknowledgements. They're totally untrue." And about 3 or 4 other people from the table came over and joined in, and they all thought the same thing. And I thought, wait a minute, we all know this is a lie. And we've been sitting here cowed either by fear of the authorities or just a desire not to offend people and be, ostracized for the rest of the evening. When in point of fact, these land acknowledgements are even a big obstacle to reconciliation, to moving forward on the Aboriginal file, which is one of the worst messes in Canada today. And what's at the core of the whole problem? They're false. They're actually untrue. They're based on false history and they make false promises. And I thought, what if we all just said no? And that put me in mind of this thing. And now I can't find it, that somebody, I'm sure somewhere said, if everybody under communism had insisted on telling the truth for one day, it would have collapsed. But so many people in so many parts of the world and in so many areas of their lives live lies. And they think it makes their lives easier. But this is where you get to the personal part. It doesn't. It is a transformative experience to say, from now on, I will not be part of falsehoods. I mean, sometimes it's awkward, right? There are moments where it would be easier to lie. You could get more money. You could escape from an awkward situation. But then you get caught in the lie and you have to keep living it. And it's not a call to be rude to people or unduly harsh in your judgments, but to be honest, never to say the thing that is not, and never to sit there nodding and smiling or even just silent when you hear something you know isn't true.
I've got to ask you this. We do hear so many lies in politics and media. Does lying really matter?
Well, I think that it does. And as I say, I think it matters in public policy
Mm-hmm.
because it means that people are misdiagnosing a problem, and then providing wrong solutions, and then being deceitful about what actually happened as a result. So you don't get this kind of useful
Sure.
feedback mechanism on what works and what doesn't. Like, whereas in the marketplace, I mean, one of the classic things, it doesn't matter what lie you tell. If there's no customer in your store, you don't make a sale. They get this inescapable truth that your product is not pleasing the public. But it's also on a personal level. And again, I brought up this example that sort of comes up in movies from time to time, but it's a real thing where somebody has is serving a life sentence in prison, and justly. They've been convicted of some terrible thing they did, and their whole life has been a mess, and you feel sorry for them, but they do belong behind bars. And then they find truth, normally because they find the Lord, and they say, for the first time in my life, I'm free. And you think to yourself, I mean, in some sense, this is an absurd statement. No, you're behind bars and there you will stay. You don't get to choose how you're going to spend your day or where, who you will associate with, any of that. But the freedom that comes from setting aside the deceit and living the lie and all of the burdens, it is in fact liberating. And I found this in my own life when I changed my mind on a series of public policy issues. And every time I thought, oh, this is a bit weird, like when I became in favor of civilian gun ownership, because I believed in gun control when I was young. And I thought, I'm going to go through the rest of my life carrying this idiotic belief that will crush me. And instead, it was like, hey, wait a minute. No, my worldview makes more sense. I am freer and easier. I believe in the right to self-defense.
Yeah.
I believe that an unjust government should be opposed. It all worked for me. And then there were a series of other things, including becoming pro-life, and then becoming Christian. And at every step, I thought, well, now I'm really doomed to unpopularity and misery. And instead, every time, the burden was lighter. So I say to politicians who are afraid if they tell a lie that their career will end, the answer is probably it won't. People will be so thrilled and excited and pleased that your popularity will soar. But suppose it does, and you have to go and do something else for a living. Okay, you're no longer a politician telling lies and implementing failed policies and pretending they worked. So you give that up. But on the other hand, you're no longer a politician implementing failed policies and deceiving people about what happened. And in your personal life, it's just cleaner, it's lighter. There are plenty of things you can do in this world where you don't have to lie, and you will be a happier and better person. So why not try it? What is to be gained by living in a web of deceit? I mean, you look at the political parties now and their carefully massaged platforms that are just, I don't know how they can stand to recite the talking points. I don't know how they can bear it.
Yeah, and it's great for us to be able to have a conversation on this. It sounds like lies is just one of the new set of clothing that's given to the emperor for the emperor's new clothes.
Yes, and everybody does it, so it becomes habitual, and you think it's not a big deal. And oh, I'm lying today so I can be honest tomorrow. You know, the father of lies feeds us all kinds of comforting thoughts about deceit. But at bottom, it's just a bad thing. Everybody knows deceit is bad in a marriage. Deceit is bad in a family. You shouldn't deceive your kids. Your kids maybe sometimes ought to, not be completely frank with you about things, but it's bad in business dealings. Why would it be better in politics? Why would this, where the police power of the state is invoked, why would this be the one place where it's really important to lie all the time?
Well, I think that in business, it would probably be referred to as fraud. A new word that we hear a lot is misinformation. Is misinformation not just a fancy word for lying?
Well, it is when it's not the government saying that something that's true shouldn't be discussed because they find it unpleasant, which is where misinformation is itself very often a lie, because someone has said something that's actually true and people are going, oh, yeah, that's true. I didn't realize anybody else thought that. And they're like, no, that's misinformation. We went through this with COVID, right, with the masks and that sort of thing, and the social distancing, and the fact that the idea that this was a deadly disease to healthy middle-aged people, or that if you got the vaccines, you'd never get COVID. We were just told one lie after another. But everybody who tried to say, wait a minute, I'm not sure these vaccines really work very well, or I don't think that it lurks on surfaces, or I don't think the masks are very effective, especially not the cloth ones, was accused of misinformation because they were telling the truth. And that to me is ridiculous. I mean, don't use neologisms as a good rule for clean living as well.
Right. So are there some examples that you could maybe share with us of politicians who've been good at telling the truth?
Yes, and actually, the column you referred to came out of a speech that I gave to the Economic Education Association of Alberta, in which I focused on two people in particular, and one of them was Martin Luther King Jr. And you think what an extraordinary moral beacon he was, and one of the reasons why is that he never lied. Well, in his personal life, he had some failings, but in his public life, and on one point in particular, at a time, remember when this was enormously controversial, do you want full social equality? And it would have been very easy to say, oh, no, 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 no. We're happy to be treated as second rate in all kinds of ways. We don't believe in racial marriage or intermarriage, but there's just a few little things we want. And King never said that. He said, yes, we're all God's children, and I look forward to the day when we sit down in brotherhood in the states in the United States like Georgia and Alabama, where the situation was worst at the time. And this was, it might sound tactically unwise, but in fact, even tactically, it was enormously powerful because it called people to a vision and it did get you caught in little deceits. And then the other one that I cited, Patrick Moore, who has spoken at some of those EEA events, though he couldn't make that one. And I'm not saying that everything Greenpeace thought in the early days was correct, but here were some people who said they were always going to act on what they believed and they were always going to be straightforward about it. And they changed the world because they didn't trim and hedge and fudge like some political party. And then the third example, obviously, is Jesus Christ. We can't be him. But at the same time, this extraordinary power of just saying what is so and saying, I am not going to be rude about it. I'm inviting people on an exciting journey. I'm not trying to exclude them. But here's how things are. And it's enormously important that you should know it. And in the end, it will make you a better and a happier person. So come along with me. And we see how Martin Luther King changed the United States, that I have a dream speech. I think you can still find it online. And if you haven't seen that incredible concluding part of it, it is, again, almost a transformative experience. It's a marvelous thing, and everybody should watch it. And everybody should think about how we're all environmentalists now because of people like Patrick Moore. And we may still debate the details, and I hope we do so honestly. But the idea that we can afford to ignore human impact on the planet, Greenpeace completely changed that, and they did it because of the power of truth and of honesty. And so it really is, again, I say to politicians, don't think I'm asking you to give up your glorious, horrible political career. I'm saying you could be a much better person and a much better politician if you just told us the truth, including when you don't know something or when you're worried about something or when you think your party's policy in some area may not be as good as the press release said it was. Talk to us like adults and you'll become an adult.
Right. Well, and we want to have that give and take in conversation. It certainly takes courage for politicians and other leaders to swim, let's say, upstream against the popular opinion. Do you think it's possible that maybe even our education system perhaps has something to do with this peer pressure?
Oh, unquestionably. I mean, one of my things I keep saying is everybody knows government-run schools are terrible. So why don't we bring in the voucher system under some name or another so that the government makes sure everybody can afford an education, but it doesn't actually run the schools? And surely it is so much past time to bring this in because the current result is that kids aren't learning, they're not happy, and they're not becoming good citizens. But again, I want to say to politicians, you might think that telling the truth will get you in trouble, and there will be a jolt. I'm not saying there won't. But if you make some controversial statement, here's what's going to happen. The media are going to say, wow, did you really say that? And then they're going to hand you a microphone. And you get to explain what you said and why you said it. And if you haven't thought it through, you're going to be in the soup. But if you have, it doesn't take as much courage as you might think. I mean, some sense to me, what takes enormous courage is lying, of saying, I'm going to live my whole life in a web of deceit and unhappiness. Like that, I wouldn't dare do that. And I'm not saying I'm a model, right? I'm just saying the truth will make you free. And it will make you free at all kinds of levels, including you will be a lot freer from anxiety because you will no longer be living at odds with the whole way that you and the universe are meant to be.
Yeah. Well, just in that conversation about freedom, it definitely makes me think of Me and Bobby McGee by Janis Joplin, saying that freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. Just from what we're chatting about here. Now, I wanted to ask you, what do you think lies have to do with the desire to control the listener?
Well, yes, obviously, you're getting into what's that Martin Buber's thing about an I-it relationship with another human being rather than an I-thou relationship. And once again, you're being promised short-term gain, but you're looking at extreme long-term loss. The idea, I mean, whoever gets to their end of their life, is it the Tony Robbins thing about you're on your deathbed? Do you think to yourself, I wish I'd manipulated people more? You know, it's like, I wish I'd spent more time playing video games, you know, or I wish I'd spent more time drunk. There's all these sort of things that nobody ever says on their deathbed. So think about the fact that sooner or later we must all die. And what do you want on your tombstone? You know, he never told the truth unless he had to. I don't think so. I don't think people go into politics thinking, now I shall lie. But the process is very corrupting and subtly so. I understand it's hard. But if you take the long view and say, what do you want people, how would you like people to see you properly speaking? Those who see you as you are, because the Lord sees you as you are. What do you want him to see? Is it somebody who was so good at lying that people thought they were telling the truth? I wouldn't dare get to the pearly gates and have that be what they said. Like there's going to be enough bad stuff in the book already. Let's not make it worse, okay?
And unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. John, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It was great to have you here and to chat about this transformation topic. That was Dr. John Robson. He is a professor at Augustine College and a columnist with the Epoch Times. You can check out his thought-provoking articles at thejohnrobson.com. For all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Michael Clausen. Thank you for watching.